Hello, and thank you if you're joining us on this very, very sunny Sunday. It is 32 degrees where I am, which is like 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty unusual for the UK. So if you're, maybe you're listening in the garden with a glass of something cold, then I applaud you if you're doing that. Thank you to Harriet Tyce for joining us on this beautiful day, for giving up the chance to be outside. Hello to you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on. No, I've been outside. I've done my outside, and I'm nearly melting. So it's very, very nice to be back in, and I have a fan blowing at me, so it's slightly more civilized than it was outside.
Do you like it? Are you a sunbird or more of a, I don't know, polar bear?
Polar bear. I'm not really. I think I'm upholstered for the heat as opposed to for the cold as opposed to the heat, and it is just too unpleasantly hot at the moment. Our house is like a sauna inside, actually, and outside. If we sit outside for any length of time, we get bitten because we've got loads of mosquitoes in North London. So, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to their threatening thunderstorms in the next few days, and I'm very much hoping that we'll have one of those. So,
yes, get back to normal. Yeah,
yes, please.
I spent almost a decade living in sort of tropical places. I was 7 years in Singapore and a couple of years in West Africa. So I'm kind of used to that feeling of like little rivulets of sweat running down into private places. I sort of see. Hello to Nikki and Danella who have joined us. It's nice to see you here. So, Harriet, your first novel, Blood Orange, let's start there. That was a complete, comet of a book. It just kind of went crazy. It was a Richard and Judy book club selection, and it was on the Sunday Times bestseller list. I think it's been optioned for film or TV.
It's been optioned by World Productions, who did Bodyguard. And at the moment, I believe the phrase is that they're adapting the script. Because there's been some interest from a new streaming company called Quibi, where they're turning it into, I think it's going to be something like 12 10-minute episodes. I'm not sure exactly, but they're looking at the script at the moment. I mean, beyond that, it's just a question of fingers crossed and let's see what happens. But it's very nice that it was optioned in the first place. So I'm very excited about that possibility, at least.
Yeah, I bet you are. Hello to Terry, who's just joined us. What was it like, though, that experience of kind of going, for your debut to kind of go crazy? Was it, it sounds like a dream. Was it living the dream?
I mean, it's been amazing, but quite sort of weird, to say the least, because, I wrote this during my MA with an expected audience of about 14 people. And it just sort of took off, and then it's been a very slow build, and suddenly it did just go, particularly actually during the lockdown, that it went really crazy actually in April, because it was part of the Kindle monthly 99p deal. And I think because it had already been given quite a lot of visibility because of the Richard and Judy book club, which came at, I was very, very lucky with all the timing, because that came at the beginning, that was at Christmas, so it was, obviously before the lockdown, and it was when WH Smith's was still open and people were traveling and all the rest of it. So yeah, during lockdown, it seems to have been something that people have been reading and found quite distracting, which is nice. So that was, it's all been very surreal. And this year's been hugely surreal. And there was a period of time at the beginning, just after the pandemic and everything kind of hit, that I just thought, what is the point of, I was editing, The Lies You Told, and thinking, this is, there's really important stuff happening out there. And here I am faffing around with a made up story. It's absolutely nonsensical. But then I started to get messages from readers, including some NHS staff, just saying how much they were finding it a good distraction. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. We do need entertainment, and we do need to be taken away from grimness, even if it's for more grimness, because Blood Orange is quite grim. So, that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to look back on any of this period of time over the last year and a half without feeling that it's just been deeply surreal. And honestly, that I've just been phenomenally lucky in how it's all worked out for me on a personal basis with the books. So,
I think it's strange, isn't it? Because you put the book out there and then suddenly all these new people sort of come into your life, and all the readers. Hello to Liz Bishop, who's just joined us. And I should say, actually, if you've got any questions that you would like me to, conduit through to Harriet, feel free to put them in the comments and I will do that. The thing with Blood Orange as well, I thought, is in some ways, if I dare make a parallel, like my first novel, the main character was really quite provocative. She was quite a provocative woman. She wasn't necessarily, and I did this on purpose, she wasn't intended to be the easiest woman. She was somebody who doesn't find it easy to be very maternal, I suppose. I particularly kind of wanted to write. And I think it's the same actually with both of your novels, with Blood Orange and The Lies You Told. They're quite uncompromising in that respect. And I think when you write a book like that, you get quite an emotional response from people, don't you?
I'm really hoping Sadie in The Lies You Told is not going to be considered unmaternal, because I genuinely did my best to make her a nice maternal character, albeit one with a career. Because the pushback on Alison from Blood Orange was so strong. I mean, even 2 days ago, I was tagged into a post on Instagram from I guess she's a blogger, but it was at Harriet Tyce. You had the chance to write a truly strong feminist character and you bombed it. She's weak, she's pathetic, she's and it's like, oh my God, you're so angry. Why are you so angry? She's not real. It's not real, not a real person, not a real story, not a real child. It's all, and it's funny how people seem to, it's almost like a personal affront if someone isn't behaving in a way that they think is, and I do wonder what it says about what they're frightened of in themselves. If maybe there's a small part of them as they're reading it is thinking, oh, given the right set of circumstances, I could see that I could end up doing that. I might end up, oh no, I can't have anyone thinking that. I've got to burn the witch in case someone thinks I am also the witch. It's a very, and then you start questioning whether it's almost a kind of internalized misogyny if people aren't behaving, because, there's always this Madonna whore dichotomy for women, isn't there? That, you're either the perfect mother or you're just some slapper down the road. And it's there's no kind of room for grey areas in the way that male characters are given. If you take one of those maverick male police officers, right, who's who neglects his kids, who neglects his wife because he's off on the chase of the criminal, and he's got his whiskey and he sits in his car and he pees in a bottle and he smokes and he's overweight and generally just completely shambolic, and everyone's like, oh, but look at the great maverick cop, he's so interesting and he's managed to solve the crime. And you get a woman doing that and she's scum. I mean, it's quite irritating.
It is really irritating. I mean, that was where I wanted to go with the first novel. Was exactly that, was how maybe you could have some sympathy for a character who is a good mother, despite the fact she finds it really hard because she isn't naturally sort of cupcakes and cuddles. That's not how she's lived her life. And then she's had children, and then she's had to develop those skills. And I think in most other areas, we forgive people for needing to sort of, learn how to do something. We consider that a good thing. But when it comes to mothers, it's like you're supposed to just be able to do it straight off the bat with instinct and without any kind of hesitation.
Because we are naturally maternal, Jo. We're naturally maternal. We're naturally, we're there to be nurturing and warm. Yeah, sometimes.
So Blood Orange, and then you said it had this, it kind of really kind of took off. How was it to write the second novel then? In the wake of
really that? It was very, very, very difficult indeed. And I mean, and I've sort of said this in everywhere I've talked about this. I had an 82,000 word manuscript that I wrote in 2018. So it was sort of between the acquisition of Blood Orange and publication. And the idea, of course, was that it would be done pretty much by the time that Blood Orange was published, so that we could, sort of then go ahead and be publishing it at the beginning of this year, it would have been. And it just didn't work at all, because I found it almost impossible to tune out all of the other noise. I was looking at reviews and I was getting more and more hunted about everything. And it just turned into a weird, I mean, I don't know, it's just a really strange and not very good book. Though some of the writing's all right. I mean, I think there's bits that I might read in future and go, okay, well, that's okay. But generally, it's just completely barking mad. So we had to scrap that. We had to scrap that in its entirety. And I had to start again. And I was starting again against the backdrop of actually publishing Blood Orange and starting to see things sort of, yeah, it was not a much fun. It was not much fun, and I really didn't think I could do it. I was absolutely convinced that it was not going to work and I was never going to get to the end. And I had sort of a few moments of quite bright sunshine coming in when I was, some of the scenes that I really loved in the book. But overall, I mean, I sincerely hope that this is going to be the most difficult book to write, and that, I mean, I know that each book will bring its own difficulties in different ways, but the barriers I felt I had to overcome to do this particular book were quite steep, and I'm very proud of the fact that I did actually manage to achieve that. It feels as if it's a rite of passage that I've gone through.
Yeah, well, you wrote a cracker as well. I mean, what's the so I really love that word you used, actually, where you said you felt hunted when you were trying to write that. I mean, because I get that. And is that because, like you said, like all those outside voices, like kind of readers and reviewers and all of that sort of starts to encroach on your idea?
Well, I think it was just the idea that there would be readers. It was having to just deal with the idea that this was a different sort of beast, that it was something that would have, it would have some sort of audience, and that people might have expectations, because, nobody read Blood Orange with any kind of expectation at all, because it's a debut, and so they don't. And then, of course, people have formed opinions about Blood Orange, and, some people have loved it, other people have hated it. It's been interestingly divisive, a sort of slightly Marmite, because of the characterization, I think. And so I had a whole worry about whether, I mean, and in some ways, Lies You Told, because I don't go down the whole sort of sex and booze line nearly. I mean, there's barely any. In fact, I'm letting my 12-year-old read it, and I wouldn't let my children go anywhere near Blood Orange at any point ever until, I'm dead.
But isn't it? And boozy.
Yeah. No, it's very, very boozy. And Lies You Told is a much more, from a moral point of view, I'd say, well, from a sort of dangerous behaviours point of view, there's none of that kind of thing. No. And I mean, in a way, that was also quite a strong response to some of the reception of Blood Orange, I guess, that I was just thinking I didn't want to, because some people had been quite so moralistic, I was panicked. I just panicked, I think. And so for a long time, Sadie, who's the main character of The Lies You Told, was not really a character at all in her own right. She was just the not Alison, the kind of anti-Alison. Right. And I had to put quite a lot of work in, actually, to give her a little bit more, so that she was herself. And I mean, I see her, and now I know her, but it did take a while for her to be able to emerge from that particularly noxious shadow. And I think to be honest, it's just writing something for the first time under contract as well, because, you can spend God knows how long you write your first book, and nobody has any sort of expectations, and there's no one's making you do it. No one, the world doesn't necessarily need another book. It's my decision to have done this. It's my decision to have put it out there to see if anybody's interested. But then there's a contractual obligation for the second one, and I think that's it's an interesting shift in one's mentality to see that this is actually a professional obligation, and not just sort of, so you can still sit in bed and make stuff up, but now you've got to be a little bit more efficient about it and actually make sure that it's done to a deadline.
I think especially when you've done, you mentioned before that you did a master's, I did one as well. And I think when you're on those programs, obviously, quite rightly, very often they're quite, not arty, I was going to say arty-farty. I was then trying to replace arty-farty with a more sophisticated word. But you know what I mean? They take the time, and they're about the language and about the, appreciation of developing your craft and, deep thought, really. And then suddenly you get published, and like you say, you have a contract and you have a deadline, and you have people sort of sending you little kind of "how's it going" emails, and you've got to maintain that kind of sense of your craft while also doing what you're suddenly being paid for. And it's like a whole other, that sort of, I suppose it's like stepping from an amateur up to a
it's you get a new job. It becomes a job, and it hasn't been a job before. It's been a sort of indulgence. And it is an indulgence that it gets to be my job. To sit in bed and make stuff up it's an extraordinary thing to be able to spend one's time doing. But
it's a weird thing to spend your time doing. I wanted to ask you
a question. Totally weird.
Quite a weird thing, isn't it, to make stuff up?
Completely weird, and completely self-indulgent. But also, I think certainly in my case at least, indicative of quite a sort of neurotic mentality, in the sense that I'm always sitting there thinking, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Yes.
Oh my God, what did they say? And, you know, and sort of, and it's where you take little tiny bits of clues, where someone doesn't reply to a phone call for 2 days, and then someone else doesn't reply to an email, and then someone else doesn't say hello to you in the street, and suddenly you've created this whole conspiracy where everyone hates you because you said this thing is a party, and you send out apologizing emails to everyone, and they're like, what? Didn't even see you. And you realize that the whole thing has been a construct of your own imagination. So I think, in a way, if one can monetize one's neuroses at all, that's actually quite pleasant. So but yeah, it does feel, it was honestly only getting the it was getting the messages from some readers saying how much of an escape it had been from them, from, you know, what they were facing in terms of their actual reality of day-to-day living. And then, you know, they get to have half an hour at night where they go away and read something complete, and you just think, well, actually it might be odd, but it is making people, it's probably not as odd as acting. I think acting is really odd. I mean, that would be really quite sort of,
I wouldn't even try. So there's a sort of almost a little degree of therapy, isn't there, I think, about writing,
yeah,
and even about reading, because then you sort of live vicariously through these lives of, you know, you maybe do things through characters that you just wouldn't otherwise dare to do.
Yes. And you have that process of catharsis as well, so that you can actually allow you sorry, I'm about to have a cat walk into the screen. That's not very helpful. Here he is.
That's a beautiful cat though.
Yes, but he's annoying. Sorry about that. It's because I've got space on my desk, so he thinks it's his space. No, I think that you're taken on an emotional journey, aren't you? That you get caught up into you get caught up into the character's life and onto their emotional arc, and so the catharsis is a completely escapist and rather wonderful thing that your imagination can, you know, it can just take these sort of black and white marks on a page and turn it into something that's so real. I mean, it's sort of magical, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not to be too
as well, because your books, a bit similarly to my books, although my books, say, they go off in a complete tangent, but they also
come back to. I have to say, it was all Chekhovian, and it's, you know, that we saw why we were in Mogadishu, because it came in at the end as to why it was quite so relevant in terms of Joe's last book. This
is my new book. So, I mean, that was one thing I was going to say when we're talking about the therapy, like, and the catastrophizing that you mentioned. I mean, like, The Last to Know, my new book, which is about an American journalist who moved back to the UK. And I started writing that just after I had personally just moved back to the UK. And I think I'm like obsessed with doing this thing where my experience of moving back to the UK was very positive, but
I really hope it was nothing like that, because that is mental.
Like I say, it goes off on quite a tangent there. But I think I'm quite obsessed with doing this thing of kind of like going, ooh, but what if you did something like this and it just went horribly wrong? What would that be like? And then I just and I think there's a sort of almost a kind of a therapy for us in there.
Definitely.
It's about real things that, you know, and your books are very much, I think, because obviously your background was as a criminal barrister, and your character in Blood Orange is a criminal barrister, and I don't know maybe so much about The Lies You Told, but it seems to me that
that's 11 years on the school gate, 11 years of primary school, which we've just come to an end of, and this has been quite cathartic from that point of view, to work through some of the more egregious social anxieties I had during the course of that, because I think that it's really tricky. You think you've left the playground behind, and then suddenly the playground is there sort of confronting you, and it's not just your child, you're also a part of that whole kind of weirdness. Some
of the bullies are outside of the gate, aren't they?
There's a lot of projection, I think, and there's a lot of people living through their children. I mean, I have to say that I think if you're someone who's seeking importance in the field of your child's school, you probably should go and have a word with yourself about what your activities are. But yeah, so it was cathartic from that point of view. I had quite a lot of fun with aspects of that book.
So tell us a little bit about The Lies You Told, because I've been lucky enough to read it, because it's not out until the 20th of August.
Yeah, that's right, 20th of August.
I've been lucky enough to read it, so I know. So tell us a little bit about that book and about the sort of the vibe of the book, because it's very dark again. It's very tense.
Yeah, I guess I don't mean to do that, but I do. I couldn't. I mean, if I were even to write a rom-com, it would have a sort of a feeling of threat throughout, I think.
Everyone would die.
And that, well, I read Eleanor Oliphant and the cat appeared, and actually I was just convinced that something terrible was going to happen to that cat, because it's how my mind works. But you know, as it turned out, no, it was fine. Well, no, so The Lies You Told is a book about a woman called Sadie and her daughter Robin, who's 10, and they've unexpectedly and quite it's not in good circumstances that they've done a very abrupt departure from their comfortable family home in America, and they've moved back to London because of the breakdown of Sadie's marriage to Robin's father Andrew, and they had nowhere to go, but suddenly a place has offered itself, which is that Sadie was estranged from her mother, who's now died, and her mother has left her house to Robin, but only on condition that Robin is enrolled at the very prestigious North London school to which Sadie herself went, and at which Sadie herself was miserable. And this is a school that's very difficult to get a place at. And so they've sort of rather written off the whole thing. But then a place becomes available just as the crisis in the marriage becomes completely overwhelming. And Sadie feels really they've got no choice but to go back to this old horrible house, her childhood home that she never wished to see again, and to send her daughter to this school that she never wanted to see again either. And it's, you know, it's a decision that's made within about a week, and they come screeching back. And as Robin has to negotiate the politics of the school yard, Sadie has to negotiate the politics of the school gate and try and re-establish herself back as a barrister. But she's lucky enough to be given a trial, which is the trial of a teacher who is accused of an inappropriate sexual relationship with one of his pupils. But Sadie's sort of rather concentrating on that and not necessarily concentrating on everything that's happening at the school with her own daughter. So
I really like how sorry, Harriet, how honest you are about that. Like there's quite, you know, there's quite some detail, and I actually think it adds to the tension about how she manages to work and get back this constant, just, you know, she's always sort of on the verge of letting her daughter down, or something going wrong, and all the plans just kind of tumble to the ground because she's the, you know, an only a single mum with a job, with a daughter, and just trying to hold all that together. And I think that's actually a really fascinating part of the story.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, I left the bar after I had children precisely because it wasn't. I just couldn't make it work as a career with the lack of flexibility that was entailed. I mean, and I think if you're the primary carer for your kids, it's not something that it's not a job that's possible to do. And I mean, as I did in Blood Orange as well, I was really interested in exploring the tensions of what if somebody were still doing it and how it would actually operate within, you know, within the confines of having to get to school for a certain time, and there's a lack of, you know, that there isn't much sort of forgivingness in terms of pickup times, and if you don't have a network, if you don't have after school care, or you don't know the other mums well enough, or you don't have friends, or you don't have family around, I mean, what are you meant to do? And I mean, we've all seen what's happened when schools are shut over the last few months as to the impact that that's had on everyone's working lives. And I think that it's something that I mean, I do find it very interesting, and I do find it now, even with older kids, that the tensions of trying to sort of get time that's dedicated to work and trying to fit everything in is, you know, it's an interesting conundrum, and something that I enjoyed exploring.
Because it's so important in the book. I mean, obviously, there's two. She's being pulled in two directions because obviously, you know, the relationship with her daughter is extremely important, but also the case that she's working on is extremely important. You know, this is a teacher who's been accused of impropriety, and it's really important that case is, you know, and he's either, you know, that the truth is discovered, because that's important for society. So she's kind of being pulled by these two incredibly important things, and there's sort of no way for her to square that circle, really.
No, and I don't. Well, I think it's an intractable situation. I mean, and I think that that's something that we all do find in real life, that are, you know, professional and personal obligations, and I mean, and in a way, what can often happen is that you have your obligations to your children, you have your obligations to your work, and so the other obligations kind of go out of the window. I mean, I remember reading once that the agent Juliet Mushins had said that, all psychological thrillers would be, the situations would be resolved if the protagonist had female friends.
Yes.
And why is it none of these women have got friends? And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And that's a really interesting point, that you need to there needs to be an answer to this question as to why there isn't a better network of support. Because, I'm lucky enough, I've got friends who just sit there and say, don't be stupid, or they'll help out, or, whatever. But, how you can actually create a fictional character who is sufficiently isolated, and you have to take them out of there, which is why we have the opening in The Lies You Told, where there's this rather sort of dramatic situation of them suddenly having to come back and be somewhere where there is no one. Because if you've got everyone normal around you and you've been there for 7 years, then let's face it, none of this stuff would necessarily happen, would it? Absolutely. Or not in the same kind of a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think psychological thrillers, they're completely dependent on people being isolated. In fact, quite recently, myself and some other authors that we wrote an anthology.
Yes, I read that. It was great, really good.
Thank you. And it was so all the proceeds went to the Samaritans. And it was one thing that I found myself saying during an interview actually that I gave about it, was that actually most of my characters, if they thought to phone the Samaritans or anything like that, who might kind of help them, basically support them, they probably wouldn't. I wouldn't have a book. I wouldn't have
no
that sort of support. You need someone, like you just say, to go to, and for someone to say, well, maybe we look at this another way.
Exactly.
Kind of talk them down a little bit.
Yeah.
Juliet Mushin said, just that reminded me. Somebody who's doing, Amber Henshaw, hello to Amber. She asked if you still work as a criminal barrister, and you just
No. I stopped that.
You stopped after you had children. I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of your work as a criminal barrister and your writing, and whether one sort of informs the other, and how you kind of went from that career, to this completely different thing.
Well, I had quite a long gap. I mean, I had the kids, and then I was sort of flailing around, feeling quite frustrated because I wasn't working. And I mean, I was looking after the children. Of course, I was busy, but it was just not, I wasn't feeling particularly, it just felt like I'd gone from having this quite stressful, structured career. Well, it wasn't structured because it was all over the shop, but I was very, very busy. And all of a sudden I was very, very busy, but I'd just become the expert in where are the pants, and who's got the shopping in, and where's the shopping, and what's for dinner, and that was a little bit frustrating after what had been. I mean, I'm not saying that my career as a barrister was particularly high flying, and I was mostly dealing with sort of shoplifting and affrays, but still I was going to court. I was sometimes even wearing a wig and gown. I was representing people for things which are important, because justice is important. And so even though the cases themselves may not have been that senior, there, it's not to say that there wasn't a great significance to them. And then, being the expert in where are the pants and my socks aren't all there was difficult. And so I started writing just sort of by way of an evening thing, because I'd written poetry at school, and I hadn't written for nearly 20 years, and I wasn't even sure what to do with inverted commas, which I know sounds silly, but how do you write speech on a page? I didn't.
There's two different kinds of inverted commas. I didn't even know that until
there's a double quote, and then there's it's too much. It was quite intimidating to start with, but then as I started going, I then ended up doing an evening course at City University, which was a novel writing. I mean, it went on over a year, but it was just one evening a week, and we had a presentation at the end to agents who, a few agents did come, and I actually started to get some agent interest. I mean, this was about 8 years ago, and 2010, no, it was 10 years ago, and it I don't know, at the beginning I had just sort of thought, well, this might be quite fun, and then I suddenly got like, oh, hang on, maybe I could. But all I was focused on was the idea of getting an agent. So I just kept working towards getting an agent, and I hadn't really thought about what happened next. I found out what happens next, and that's very nice. But I think this, in terms of how one's informed the other, I mean, obviously from a research point of view, because both of the books have got quite strong legal subplots, running through them. I mean, the murder trial in Blood Orange, and then the this teacher trial in The Lies You Told. And without my work experience, I think I would have found that quite difficult to do without a significant amount of research, which, and I'm quite lazy, I'd rather not have to do the level of research of having to think myself completely into a new career.
Even with research, sometimes it's quite hard to make it feel authentic unless you sort of really know sort of how it feels to be in that office at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. It's hard.
I know, I'd agree that I think I'd find it. I mean, I read historical fiction sometimes, and I'm just like, how do you do that? I don't even understand how you do. Anyway, I thought that it was I thought it was a line of work in which people had interest. And, there've been a number of fictional and dramatic representations of barristers and life at the bar. And I thought, well, I can, throw my tuppence worth in here because I have 10 years of experience. And so from that point of view, it has been integral. And I think from the point of view of getting me, the advocacy training helped in terms of, I mean, I find reading aloud absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
But I think if I hadn't had any kind of public speaking experience before being published and doing events, it would have been, I mean, it's terrifying enough having had that experience. I think it would have been very, very difficult indeed. I couldn't imagine it. I've now
got this vision, and this is just how my mind works, but I've now got this vision of you with like your wig and gown on writing. It would give you wonderful sense of authority.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't. It's very, very scratchy. It's actually, and it's much too hot for that. So no, I don't.
That's the sort of insight we wanted, really, is the scratchiness of the wig. But were books, I mean, I can see this amazing bookshelf behind you. When we first connected, I wasn't even sure if that was a real bookshelf. I was like looking, and it is a real bookshelf. So
it's real.
Suggests to me that books are important to you, that, they've always been important to you because you have quite the collection there. So is writing something that, even as you went off and, became a criminal barrister, was it always like a little idea in your head?
Not sure consciously that it was. I mean, I did a degree in English, and so I had really, reading has always been a very integral part of my life, but I'd not really thought that it was something. I don't know. I just know that, I mean, I think I've said this elsewhere as well, that a friend of mine signed up to do an MA in creative writing at Royal Holloway, I think back in 2006. And my first emotion was complete rage. I mean, I was absolutely furious. And then I just had to sit there and go, why are you being so weird about this? This is really weird. And then I realized that it was just plain downright jealousy. And I was just like, hang on, what I should be doing. And I hadn't realized that it was something that I felt so strongly about. It was only when I saw someone else doing it that I thought, but then, I sort of looked at Royal Holloway Masters in Creative Writing. I thought, I don't have 5,000 words. I don't have, and so and I tried. And as I say, I then looked at speech marks on the page and thought, I don't know how to do this. And it took me another 3 years, I think, to make any kind of starting point. But I think in retrospect,
things can put you off starting to write, and it's actually, ironically, I think as you get more, and you are published, you realise that they don't actually make any difference. Like,
no.
There's anyone out there that's thinking, my grammar is enough, I can't be a writer. Like, that is the last thing that matters.
I know, I absolutely agree. And I mean, in fact, I was doing a discussion with a couple of authors recently for a thing, and that one of the questions was, how would you recommend people get into writing? And I mean, I leapt straight in saying, just read a lot. And both of them were like, of course, reading a lot. We should take for granted the reading a lot's been done. Actually, it's sitting down and starting, having a word count every day, doing 1,000 words a day or something. And I thought about it, and I thought, actually, they're absolutely right. But it is just about getting the pen on the page, metaphorically, so whether you're on a keyboard or however you're doing it, that it's stopping being scared. Yes. And I think, I was terrified of, I think it was a question of what the judgment of others might be, what my own judgment would be, whether I would be able to. I mean, I've always been able to write cross emails, but that's a slightly different thing from being able to write a sustained narrative. So
I think it was almost like bad books that got me writing, because I would always read kind of wonderful books, and I would be thinking, oh, I'm never going to write like, Margaret Atwood. I'm never going to write like so and so, and I just sort of talk myself away from, like, well, what's the point? What's the point? And then I think, but every so often, I would read a book and I'm thinking, but to be honest, I'm sure I could write something as bad as that. Like, yes. And I just sort of started there. And
no, I know exactly what you mean. No, I know exactly what you mean.
We're kind of running on in our time, so I've realised I should ask you a few questions, because I invited people to, to give us questions, so I should ask them. So Marie, who asked a question on Twitter, said, faced with rejection, how do you stop yourself thinking, I've been rejected because I'm terrible?
Oh, I wish I could. If I knew the answer to that, I'd bottle it and sell it. I think that's always my initial feeling. My initial feeling is that it's personal, and you just have to. I think it gets easier to work through it, doesn't it? It takes less. You might have sort of 24 hours of feeling absolutely appalling, but then you just sort of pick yourself up and go right next, and you just put it. You can't dwell on it, can you? Because
no, I mean, every rejection, every bad review, I just, my initial reaction is like, oh, well, this just proves everything I thought I can't write.
Exactly.
I mean,
that's
the first thought process, and the second thought process, is kind of like, well, there have also been good reviews. You sort, you kind of do your own little internal therapy, don't you?
Yes, so, exactly that. Exactly.
So I guess what I would say to Marie is, like, you probably will think you're terrible, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean you are.
No, it's not real. I mean, it's not a real feeling. It's just a sort of, and rejections aren't personal. Rejections are for any multitude of reasons, but not because you're terrible or not because the work is terrible. It just, when people say it's not right for that time, it's, that is often exactly what the situation is.
Yeah. Especially, you're right. I mean, especially those formal rejections, like agents and publishers and things, more often than not, it's because, their list is full of books that are just slightly too similar to yours, or the agent is going on maternity leave and they don't want to take a new client. I mean, like, it could be for any reason.
Anything, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Pauline asked if you ever imagined how successful Blood Orange would be, which we touched on a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so, no, not at all. Not at all.
We all hope. Nikki asked, have you started book 3?
You, my editor? Yes. No, if you're no, I'm about to. I have an outline which I'm happy with, and it's very strongly in my head, and at the moment I'm in the kind of, I don't know which room I've got to write in. It's like sort of trying on lots of different outfits before you go out. And I'm just at the moment trying on lots of different places to use my laptop, which is always the kind of the very last throat clearing before I actually just start getting on and writing 1,000 words a day.
Literally, I thought that was a metaphor. You're literally working out which room to write in.
Am I going to sit in the kitchen and tell everyone to go away? Am I going to stay in bed? But if I stay in bed, then it's right opposite where my husband's working, because he's working from home, and so I can hear him. And is that going to work? Or maybe I need to, should I go to a cafe, or am I going to, what am I going to do? It's every time.
Yeah.
And I sit there looking at garden offices lots. And then of course I don't get a garden office, but I think, well, maybe I will one day. Yeah. And then I just end up, because I like sitting in bed, and that's what I'm going to do, is I'm just going to sit in bed with headphones in, and that's because I like writing first drafts in bed. So I am absolutely, and I mean, honestly speaking, I'm literally about to start. I'm just sort of at that very last moment before you sort of go, what's the first line? I don't know what the first line is. How do you write a book again? I don't know. It's
the last moments of resistance. But they don't teach you that stuff on the MA, do you? Like, you have to find the right room. I found myself quite recently. So a couple of weeks ago, my kids did a camp, and they were
nice.
It was 3 hours a day. They were at this tennis camp, and I basically listened to the tennis camp, and then I sat in the car for the 3 hours with my laptop and just wrote, and came home. And it worked so well for me that the next day when they were back home, I left them in the house with obviously their dad was in the house, and I just went outside the house. So I've now started looking in the car outside.
But you see, that's it. That's perfect. It's just finding, it's not about where I am. It's just about finding the right, I just need not to be interrupted for a bit. And everyone seems to want to be fed all the time.
Yeah, and if you go and sit in a car with a laptop by the side of the road outside your house, everyone thinks you're such a weirdo that they don't dare to come and disturb you. So it really, really works.
Excellent.
Amber asked us, I think this is a very pertinent question. Do you think male authors are also subject to the same self-doubt?
Yes, I mean, I'm sure they are. They may not admit it as openly, but I think that, I mean, certainly male authors with whom I'm friends would say that they have as much kind of paranoia about it's no good and there's a negative review. I mean, you can see it. You can see it on Twitter if somebody's been given a bad review and they're tagged into it. That, you know, even the most successful of people sometimes react. Because it gets to you. I mean, I do think that all authors have got maybe a skin less, because otherwise I don't think you'd be able to see what's happening around you in the way that you can spin a story out of it. And so whether they will admit to their self, I mean, some people won't. I mean, you will get very macho ones who are, you know, who are bounded in by the whole toxic masculinity expectations that they can't break out of, and I'm not sure that that will make them much happier. I do think it's much better if you can say, actually, you know what, I worry about this, because then once you've expressed it, it makes it smaller, doesn't it? It's when you don't say it, it festers.
Yeah. And also, you're right. I mean, having to keep up that facade all the time, you know, and I think that's the flip side of it is that women are actually allowed to drop the facade sometimes and reach out, you know, support each other. And sometimes, like you say, with the toxic masculinity, a lot of men don't feel that they can. It's like showing weakness. But I know, you know, behind the scenes, I had the same reaction as you. Behind the scenes, I certainly hear male authors saying all the same things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely.
Liz Bishop asked, is The Lies You Told based on real events? Which we sort of touched on, but I'm interested in hearing a tiny bit more about that, because I love stuff to do with all the toxic friendships. Because
I think I found the whole Schoolgate. I did find the whole Schoolgate experience quite, because I mean the competitive parenting is definitely a thing from NCT onwards, and I found that I hadn't expected it, which is naive of me. I just hadn't really thought about it, and then suddenly it was there in my face, and I was finding it all quite difficult. But none of this is. I mean, you know, you take. Certainly, the way that I write situations is that I take a feeling that I've had. You know, something where, you know, say there's a scene with a drinks party, and, you know, and I've gone to a drinks party and I sort of felt a bit clumsy and a bit off, and sometimes you think, oh God, you said the wrong thing, but generally actually you go along, you have a couple of glasses of wine, you start chatting to people, it's absolutely fine, it isn't a disaster. So with the, you know, but that wouldn't make a good book, would it? So it's what you said at the beginning about taking the catastrophizing and actually turning it into a story, that going to a drinks party, and then what would be the worst thing that you could do in this situation. I mean, that there was an apocryphal story about a coffee morning at a notorious school somewhere near us, where everybody went to the cafe and they were all charged 50 quid a head, and there was a table piled with pastries and nobody ate them. And I don't think this is true. I don't know whether this is a true story or not, but I liked it, and so I used that as one of the scenes.
That one.
But all I can say is I sincerely hope that what I've written about isn't true, because if it is, social services and the police need to get involved quite quickly, because that's not the kind of way that you should be behaving.
No, they are quite full on. All right, well, Harriet, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed our chat.
Me too.
And best of luck with the publication of The Lies You Told. It's brilliant.
And best of luck to you with yours, because I thought it was superb the way that the storylines wove in. It was and really dark too. I don't know why you're saying my stuff's dark. I mean, you've got some really dark stuff going on in there. It's properly.
As we were saying before we came on, I have this tendency just to kind of throw everything into one book, and then I have this like incredible knot of plot that I have to sort of somehow work it together. I can't seem to resist.
And you have incredibly cleverly. I mean, it all ties up beautifully at the end. It's really well done.
It's a bit like my cooking. I'm one of those people, I just have to put everything into one pot and do it like that. So there we go. But yeah, thank you very much. It's out on the 20th of August, The Lies You Told. I loved it. Recommend it very, very highly.
Thank you very much,
Harriet. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thanks a lot.
Your questions. Bye bye to everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.